Hey everybody, we're on Daf Pei Aleph. Some complicated laws today. We're focusing on this concept called Tumat Tehom. The Mishnah above mentioned it and said Nitma Tumat HaTehom Hasitz Meratzeh. This means an unknown source of purity. So in general, let's say there was a murder, right? And the murderer hid the body. And so the murderer knows that the body is there. Now, if I come along and happen to pass over it, happen to touch it without realizing, so I don't realize I'm tameh, but if it turns out afterwards that I was there and I touched it, so I'm tameh and I couldn't have brought Korban Pesach, and that's a problem. That's a regular source of tumah because someone knew about it. We're talking about here is a case where no one in the world knew that there was a body buried in this place. For example, a bunch of rocks from an avalanche came and piled on the person. Nobody was there. No one knows it's there. And only later we find out. So then there's a special dispensation that if someone turns out to have been tameh, this tumat tehom, then hasitz meratzeh. If we brought Korban Pesach, it's okay. The Korban Pesach is valid for him because he really had no way of knowing that he had been in contact with tumah. That's the law we're talking about. Okay, so we know for sure that this law applies to an owner. The owners of the korban, if they find out that they are tameh, it's okay. What we're going to ask today is, what about for the Kohen? What if the Kohen who was performing the korban Pesach finds out that he came into contact with an unknown grave? It doesn't have to be an unknown grave necessarily. It could be any source of impurity that was not known by anybody in the world. Does the law apply to the Kohen also? And then therefore it's valid? Or does this dispensation only apply to owners? That's the big question. We're going to ask later, does it apply to the Kohen for Korban Tamid? Not only for Korban Pesach. Assuming it does apply to Korban Pesach, what about for Korban Tamid? We're going to ask for the source of this law, and then we're going to try to figure out, just to clarify, if it becomes known before or after the sprinkling of the blood, does that make a difference? All right, but the most complicated part is going to be up here. So we're going to quote a Baraita. We quoted this Baraita yesterday that said an unknown impurity, this whole law of tumat hatehom and the special dispensation that it's okay, only applies to corpse impurity, but not anything else. And so when we say not anything else, like what else could it be? Could it apply to? Is it coming to exclude a sheretz? That if there was an unknown sheretz, nevertheless the person or the owner who brought it would be okay, and his korban would be valid. Well, we mentioned that yesterday that there's an opinion that if someone is definitely impure from a sheretz, he knows it, he can still offer a korban pesach because they'll become pure that night. So therefore, this baraita cannot be coming to exclude a sheretz, and so therefore, since it's not excluding a sheretz by the owner, it must be excluding something for the Kohen. And so you see the Kohen is included in this special dispensation. If a Kohen becomes tameh by corpse impurity, he can still do the korban, an unknown, the korban pesach is still valid. Maybe not a sheretz for a Kohen. So that's where we left it, that the Kohen is included in this law, because otherwise we can't make sense of the Baraita. But today we're going to see another interpretation. Perhaps when the Baraita said the unknown impurity only applies to a corpse, it came to exclude when the owner is impure from a zav. And that's why it was talking about only corpse for a zav. But in fact, it has no application to a Kohen. We're going to end up rejecting this and show that if a zav brings a korban pesach, it's going to be okay anyway. And so therefore, we don't really need this unknown impurity. So maybe it does apply to a Kohen. We're going to end up coming back to answer A and say that impure from sheretz may not offer a korban pesach. And once we do that, we can say that it is in fact coming to exclude the sheretz, but not coming to include a Kohen. Okay, so the solution, the answer from this entire section is going to be Does unknown impurity apply to a Kohen for Pesach? Not necessarily, right? There's no proof that it does. All right, so let's go. We're going to jump to B here, which is where we left off. Okay. Okay, can we infer from the Baraita that a Kohen would be included in the law of Tehom? Amarav Yosef, lo. Le'olam bib alim. No, that law that Baraita was talking about only the owners, not talking about a Pesach. Or not talking about a Kohen. Ube Pesach, and not a nazir. And when it said the law of unknown impurity applies only to corpse impurity, it was coming to exclude a person who was a zav or zava, that person would not be able to bring korban pesach, and even though it's an unknown case, still the law of unknown impurity does not apply to a zav or a zava, and so therefore it doesn't mean anything about a kohen. Okay, so that's what we're going to right now, but we're going to reject this. Hold on, is that true? That if someone is a zav, does the law of tumat tehom not apply and say that his korban is acceptable? It does. V'hatanya. Rabbi Yose omer, shomeret yom keneged yom sheshachatu v'zareku aleha b'sheni shela v'achar kach ra'ata ena ochelet u'petura milasot pesach sheni. If you have a woman who sees blood for 1 day or 2 days in a row, she just has to wait 1 day of one clean day. She goes to the mikveh during the day, and then she's tahor at night. So what if she's waiting that clean day, corresponding to a day on which she did see blood, and she does shechita for korban pesach after she goes to the mikveh, and the kohen sprinkles the blood for her on that second day. And then later in that day, she sees a blood a second time or a third time. And now she cannot eat from the korban pesach because she's tameh, right? Will be another day or several days till she becomes tahor. Nevertheless, she does not have to do pesach sheni. In other words, the first korban, that korban that she did is valid. Even though she was a zava, it's a valid korban. So, right, so it turns out, looks like that the law of tumat tehom actually would apply to a zava. And we say no. My tama la mishum demirases. Is it not because the frontlet of the Kohen Gadol atones for it? And so this is an application of unknown. It's all called unknown in this case. It's different from the other ones. In the other ones, there was a body that was not known that was there, or a dead mouse that was not known that was there. This one is unknown for a different reason. A person saw blood on the first day. She doesn't know if she's going to see blood the next day. So she goes to the mikveh, and the unknown part of it is the future, right? If she doesn't see blood, she'll be tahor and everything's fine. If she does see blood, then she will be tameh. So that's it. That's why it's considered within the same category of unknown impurity. No one in the world knows what's going to happen. So isn't that just because it is included in the law of unknown impurity? No, for a different reason. Rabbi Yose says that when she goes to the mikveh in the morning, then she becomes tahor, and if everything would go well, she'd be tahor the whole day. If she sees a second time blood later in the day, she only becomes tameh from then on. So therefore, if she went to the mikveh at 10 a.m. in the morning, then she brought her korban pesach at 2 p.m., and then she saw blood at 3 p.m., when she did the korban pesach, she was tahor. And that's why it's a valid korban pesach. She can't eat it because she'll be tameh at night, right? But otherwise, it's totally fine. So the truth is, we don't even need the whole tumat tehom exclusion because she's actually tahor during that entire time. Now, is that true that Rabbi Yose says that? V'hatanya, Rabbi Yose omer zav ba'al sheteri yosheshachatu v'zarku alav b'shevi'i shelo v'achar kach ra'a. Now we're applying the same thing to a male, a zav who saw twice and therefore has to wait for 7 days. A zav who sees twice has to wait for 7 days. And so it's the seventh day, the 14th of Nisan is the seventh day, and they did korban pesach for him, and they sprinkled the blood for him. And then later in the day, he saw another zav emission. So he becomes tameh. וכן, שומרת יום כנגד יום ששחטו וזרקו עליה בשני שלה. Or a woman who saw blood one day and is waiting the second day, and she was pure in the morning, she went to the mikveh in the morning, and then she does korban pesach, and then she sees blood again. According to this baraita, also according to Yose, same person as above, she becomes tameh retroactively from the morning, which means at the time she did korban pesach, she was tameh. So it really doesn't make sense that it's only mikanul haba, which he said here. Rather, it is retroactively. So according to this, it sounds like the korban pesach should not be good because she had been tameh during that time. Yet the Baraita says, ufturim milasot pesach sheni. Nevertheless, the pesach is valid, which is very strange, right? So what is the reason for this? How could the pesach be valid if she was tameh retroactively? When we said she's tameh lemafreya, that's not on the deoraita level, only at the Rabbanan level. Mid Rabbanan, she has to worry. Anything she touched or he touched during that time is going to be tameh. But from mid deoraita, she is in fact tahor. She only becomes tameh from the time that she sees blood or he sees another emission. So during the time when they did the korban pesach, they were in fact pure mid deoraita, and that's why the korban is acceptable mid deoraita for them. And we have a proof that Rabbi Yose thinks this way, that the impurity is not retroactive mid deoraita, but only from the time they see on. Rabbi Yoshaya must agree with this also, that is what Rabbi Yose said, as we see from the following conversation. That Tanya Rabbi Yoshaya omer, aval zav shera b'shvi'i shelo soter et shelefanav. Oh, if a zav, he was good the whole time. He saw clean. He has to wait 7 clean days. He waited 7 days, and then on the last day, he sees another emission. It destroys all the days he's waiting. He has to start again and wait 7 new days. That's what Rabbi Yoshaya said. He said, no, only that day. That day is no good. So you just have to add 1 more day. That's it. And we wonder about that. We're interrupting. If you think that impurity applies retroactively, then it'll go all the way back to the first day. And so he has to start counting all over again. If it's from now on, then even that day should be fine, because on the 7th day he goes to the mikveh in the morning. And that's already miksat hayom kikulo, so that's already 7 days. If he sees another emission at the end of the day, then it's only from then on. So even that day should count. So why could you say only the last day doesn't count? He has to add only 1 more day. So we must have gotten it wrong. Ela ema lo yistor velo yomo. Rabbi Yohanan's opinion was it doesn't break anything, because it only goes from now on, and it does not. He waited 7 days, and the partial days, like the whole thing, that's like 7 full days, and so he's good to go. That's what Rabbi Yohanan told Rabbi Yoshaya. To that, Rabbi Yoshaya responded, Rabbi Yoshaya said, Rabbi Yohanan, you agree with Rabbi Yose. So, which means from now on. Now, how could that be? And the Baraita we saw before, Rabbi Yose says it goes retroactively, which means he would not agree with Rabbi Yochanan. Rather, you have to do the whole 7 days again. Rather, it must be that in the Baraita, and this is a proof for it, when he said is tameh retroactively, that's only midrabanan. And so we're not talking about the drabanan level, because we just want to know if the korban pesach is valid or not. And so since mideoraita, the zav was tahor during the middle of the day, because he went to the mikveh in the morning and he only saw a mission at night, so therefore the korban pesach is valid for him and he's fine. All right, now we come back to our original question. Now that we established, according to the Yose, that it's only from now on, therefore this whole law cannot apply to a zav, because if a zav brings a korban pesach, it'll be fine no matter what, right? Because if that night will be his time when he can start eating, even if he sees an emission during that time, right? Because he went to the mikveh in the morning, he'll be able to eat korban pesach. So we don't need the whole seats. We don't need the unknown impurity law for a zav. So therefore, that Baraita of Rabbi Chaya way above is not coming to exclude a zav. If it's not coming to exclude a zav, then what is he excluding? Why does he say the law of unknown impurity only applies to a corpse? Since it's not excluding anything else for an owner, it must be talking about a Kohen. That the law of unknown impurity, corpse impurity, applies to a Kohen, and a Kohen would not apply to a Kohen if it was a different kind of impurity. So now we can finally figure out our answer that in fact an unknown impurity does apply to a Kohen, right? Because we rejected A and we rejected B. But we're not going to leave it like that. We're going to come back to A. And in the first time, we were assuming that an impure Sheretz may offer a Korban Pesach, but there is another opinion that someone who's impure from a Sheretz may not offer a Korban Pesach. And so if we follow that one, then there's no proof. Where it's talking about that, it's talking about the owner who was in contact with an unknown impurity. And regarding Korban Pesach, not Korban that the Nazir brings, and so we have the opinion, we follow the opinion that when someone is Tameh Sheretz, we cannot offer Korban Pesach on his behalf, and therefore the Bichi had to come and say, even if it was an unknown Sheretz, it was hidden, and no one knew it was there, nevertheless, he does not get the special dispensation of the seats. He cannot bring the korban, and it will not be valid. And so, therefore, since that could be talking about that, we have no proof that the Kohen can have this dispensation. Okay, so that's the answer to that. Now, a side question. Now that you told me about Rabbi Yose, that when someone who is a zav or a zava, that their impurity starts only from the time that they see on. So that means if she saw blood yesterday, and then she went to the mikveh in the morning of the next day, and so now she might be okay. But so she's pure during that day. But then she sees blood again in the afternoon. Well, no, that does not connect to the previous day. She's impure only from now on. If that's true, then how could you ever have a zava gemura, meaning a zava who sees 3 days in a row? Each day separates from the one before. There's no continuity, right? So that's the question to the Yose. How could you have a case where each one would add on to the other? So he has two answers. One, b'shafat, maybe she's continually bleeding all 3 days, and therefore there was no time at which it stopped, in which she could go to the mikveh, and then you could start anew. Or she saw during twilight between the first and second day, and during twilight between the second and third day. And so therefore also there was no beginning of a day in which she was not bleeding that you could say, oh, this is her first clean day. Each day was and therefore continuous with the day before. So that's interesting. The Yose would make it a lot harder for anyone to ever become a zava, because only in these two cases, not if she happened to spot bleed on just during in the middle of the first, second day, and third day. Okay, so that resolves the first question. Now we get to the next question. How about this whole thing that we said about the unknown impurity? Does it apply to a Kohen for Pesach? We said there is no proof that it does, but it could be that it does. And so now let's say it does, right? Let's say we answered yes to this. How about for Korban Tamid, which only the Kohen can bring? So what if the Kohen, was walking along, he did Korban Tamid, on his way back, it turns out there was an unknown source of impurity, an unknown corpse on the road where he had walked. Does that mean that retroactively the Korban Tamid is no good? Or does he apply that special dispensation? That's the question. We're going to see two answers. Rabbah and Rava are both going to say yes, that it's okay and it applies to a Kohen. This is quite interesting because this whole section we were saying no, all the opinions were saying no, it does not apply to a Kohen. But then we say, all right, let's say it does, right? How about for Korban Tamid? And we're going to say yes, it can. Just two ways to derive it from a vahomer or from a gezerah shava from Pesach. So here's the question. Ba'ay Rav Yosef. Kohen hameraseh betamid hutara lo tumata tehom o lo. The Kohen who's dealing with the Korban Tamid and preparing it, does, if he was in contact with an unknown corpse, grave, is he permitted? Is that permitted or not? Kohen If you say that it works for other korbanot, that of a nazir and Pesach, then does it also work for a tamid? Do we learn tamid from those other two, or do we learn it only regarding Pesach but not tamid, or can we learn from Pesach and it applies to tamid also? That's the question. All this is assuming that the answer to the previous question was yes. If it does not work for the Kohen for Pesach, then for sure it will not work for tamid. All right, that's the question. Amar Rabbah. Kal vahomer ma ba b'makom shelo hutara lo tumah yedua hutara lo tumat tehom makom shehutara lo tumah yedua eno din shehutara lo tumat tehom. So the kal vahomer follows is like this: in a place, in other words, the Pesach offering, where for the if it was for sure tumah yedua. Right, if it was for sure that the person that he was tameh, if the Kohen was for sure tameh, it would not be good. And yet, right, there was no dispensation if he knew he was tameh, and yet hutra lo tumat tehom, and nevertheless for the Kohen, because we said yes for the question above. Okay, so it's like this: if for the Kohen, for whom if he knew he was tameh, it would not be okay. He could not bring Korban Pesach. But for Tumat Tehom, it's okay. Then for Korban Tamid, where if he knows for sure he's Tameh, he can still bring Korban Tamid. Right? That was one of the places that overrides, just like Pesach is overridden for Tum'ah, so too you can bring Korban Tamid, even though you know for sure it's Tameh. So all the more so, if for Tumat Tehom, where it was unknown, that it will be permitted after the fact. So therefore, this Kal Vachomer seems to make a lot of sense, right? That Korban Tamid should be more lenient for the Kohen, because the Kohen, who is for sure Tameh, and there's no other Kohen around to do Korban Tamid, we still do the Korban Tamid betumah. So for sure, when it was unknown, it should be allowed. Okay, so that's a good Kal Vachomer. What's the problem with it? Amre umei daikinan Kal Vachomer bahalacha. This whole law of Tumat Tehom is not found in Pesukim. Rather, it is an oral tradition, and we have a rule that we do not derive a Kal Vachomer from something that is a halacha l'Moshe Misinai. We prove that from here. V'hatanya amar Rabbi Eliezer akiba aisem kaseora halacha urbi dam Kal Vachomer v'endanin Kal Vachomer mehalacha. Rabbi Akiba, when he was dealing with the law of nazir, and so we know that if a nazir touches even a barley-sized bone of a body becomes tameh, he wanted to learn a Kal Vachomer from there to a rivi'it. And there the rabbis told, and the other rabbis said, no, you can't learn a halacha. You cannot learn a Kal Vachomer from a halacha Moshe Sinai. So too here you can't. The reason seems to be that although Kal Vachomer seems to be just a logical inference, it only applies to the Torah. Because Torah is a whole unified system. And if the Torah tells you a law in one case, then you can derive that the other case should be more stringent. Whereas things that are an oral tradition, these might be just an exception, just for this particular thing, but doesn't fit into the entire rest of the structure. So you cannot necessarily learn something from a Kal Vachomer unless it's actually in the Torah. Ela Amar Rava has a second answer. He agrees that the answer is yes, but from a different derivation. Alif mo'ado mi Pesach. The word mo'ado appears in these two cases, and we saw that we derived them, we back and forth. We learned from this that Korban Pesach can be done on Shabbat, and we learned the other way around that we do Korban Tamid even when it's Tameh. So just like also when you know you for sure you're Tameh, you do it. We're going to learn the Tumat Tehom also from Pesach. Okay, so that's how we answered that question. Right, we're going to learn it from a gezerah shava. Apparently, you can use a gezerah shava for something that is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, but not Kal Vachomer. Okay, but now we want to know the source for this entire law. I know we just said that it's an oral tradition, which means it has no source. But this question of the sugya seems to be chronologically before this discussion, right? Because this discussion, Rabbah and Rava already assumed that there is no source. It's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. The only question is, how do we jump from Pesach to tamid? But how do we know regarding Pesach? That's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Okay, but now bracket that off. We're kind of going back in time and saying, how do we know what's the source in general? We're going to conclude that it's an oral tradition, but we're going to try to derive it from pasuk first. וטומאתתום גופה מהכה כתיבה. אמר רבי אלעזר אמר קרא, וכי ימות מת עליו, במחוברת עליו. Regarding a nazir, it says, if a man should die all of a sudden beside him, alav. Now, why does it say that word alav, beside him? That means that it's a case where he knows that there is a body there. Then it's a problem for the nazir. But let's say it was not alav. Let's say it was not, he didn't see it, and it was furthermore unknown. Then the nazir would not have a problem. Okay, so that's how you learn it from nazir. Ashkecha nazir ose pesach min dalan. How do we know that someone made korban pesach? If he doesn't know, if it's an unknown corpse, that's okay. Amar Rabbi Yohanan amar kira bederech rechoka lachem bimchuveret lachem. All right, the person was talking about Pesach Sheni. It says ish ish ki etameh lenefesh. The word lachem can be referring to the entire previous phrase. So ki tameh lachem. When it's impure to you, meaning when it's clear that you are impure, then you cannot do korban pesach rishon. But if it's not clear, then you can. So there you go. That's how we know that if it's an unknown source of impurity, pesach can do it. You can do korban pesach. That's Rabbi Yohanan. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish has an alternate derivation. Amar kederech. Ma derech begaloy, aftuma name begaloy. As the best of pasuk says, derech bederech rechoka. So what do you mean a derech? A derech is a road. Just like a road is open and exposed to all, so too, only if the tumah is known, like a road, then it's a problem and he cannot bring korban pesach rishon. However, if it was unknown, then he can bring the korban pesach. Okay, so there you go. 3 derivations from Pesukim, but we're going to have a problem with all of them based on this Baraita. Metibe ezehu tumatat tehom kol shelo hikir ba echad besof haolam. When is something called tumatat tehom and get the special dispensation that if it's brought b'tumah it's still okay? Only if nobody in the whole world, not even at the end of the edge of the world, knew that this body existed. If there's even one person, let's say the guy who murdered was a murderer and he hid the body, he's the only person that knows. That's not called tumatat tehom because someone knows about it. We only allow the special leniency if 0 people in the whole world know about it. If somebody knows about it, even if you don't know about it, since someone knows about it, that potentially you could have asked them and they could have publicized this. And so that person is called tameh. And if you bring a korban pesach for that person, then it's not valid. Okay, that's what the Baraita says. So this Baraita is a problem for all 3 of the answers above. Let it be Eleazar alav adi adahu. Rabbi Eleazar's answer regarding nazir is about him when he knows that there's a body, as if it's he knows so well as if it's alav, as if it's right next to him. But that's only about him. If he doesn't know it, but let's say there is someone else in the world that knows about it, right? So according to this derivation, it would still be tumat tehom because he doesn't know about it. But that's not true. It's only tumat tehom if nobody knows about it. So that's not a good derivation. And how about for Rabbi Yohanan? Damar lachem b'mchuveret lachem ad yad be ba'teren. It says if it's tameh lachem to you, plural. That means that not only one person, 2 people would have to know about it. So this and our law is only 1 person in the world. No, even if 1 person in the world knows about it, then it's not tumat tehom already. And here, 2 people know about it. It's not called tumat tehom. So that can't be a derivation. And Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish is even worse because he says if it's known to as open as a road, is known the tumah, then it's a problem for him. But if all those people don't know about it, then it's tumat tehom. But that doesn't work with this Baraita either, which says has to be 0 people in the world know about it. Right? Not good enough if it's unknown to a lot of people. It has to be 0 people. So therefore, all these derivations are not valid. Ela tehom tumat tehom kilchata gemiri la. Ukra asmachta be'alma. Rather, this whole thing is an oral tradition, not based on a pasuk. And all these pasukim that these 3 Amoraim brought are only support, but not an actual derivation. This is a very important concept, asmachta. Right? We say this a lot. If something, sometimes we use it wrongly to say if a pasuk doesn't make sense, that the drasha doesn't make sense, and pasuk is not it's not the pashat. We say, oh, maybe it was an asmachta. But truth is that with the few times it's used, the bunch of times it's used throughout the Talmud, they never reject, never say that something's asmachta because it doesn't fit with the words of the pasuk. Rather, they only say it because the law is already established to be dirabanan and or halacha. And in this case, the way that you would derive it would not fit with the halacha. So therefore, that's not the problem with the meaning of the pasuk with the pashat, but rather a problem with the way it would be derived would not be true according to the definition of the Baraita. So therefore, we have to say it's asmachta. So that's what we say here. Okay, and finally, a general question: does it matter if it became known before or after the sprinkling? We dealt with this above, but we're going to talk about it again. This whole law of the tumat tehom, that the frontlet will work and this is going to be okay because he didn't know about the tumah. That's only if noda lo la'achar zerika. He did the zerika first. The Kohen did the sprinkling first, and then afterwards, the owner realized, or maybe the Kohen realized that they had been in contact with a dead body that nobody knew about it. Then it's okay. But aval noda lo lifnei zerika lo meraseh. But if he found out about it, even if it was an unknown body, but he found out about it. And then he knew he was tameh, and then did the zerika. It's no good. It's invalid. Okay, that makes sense. But we have a problem because we have a Baraita that contradicts it. If one finds a body that's across the way, so it's blocking the entire width of the road, that if it's a Kohen, then for purposes of terumah, that Kohen will be tameh and cannot have terumah, because there's no special dispensation for terumah. The nazir ve'oseh pesach tahor v'chol tameh ve'tahor le'haba hu. But if it's a nazir or someone who wants to make a korban pesach and he goes over that spot, then tahor, he can bring the korban pesach and he can continue being a nazir. Why? And furthermore, all this is lehaba. It even applies lechatechila for the future. So when he passes over that unknown grave and he finds out, then he can still go ahead and do it and finish his korban pesach. And so you see, that means the opposite of what Mor bar Rabbah said. So rather, we're going to change the words of Mor bar Rabbah. Ela yitmar hachik itmar. Amar Mor bar Rabbah la temad noda lo la'achar zerika hu dimraseh ava noda lo lifnei zerika lo meraseh. No, do not say what he said before, that if it became known to him after the sprinkling, that's when it's valid. But if he knew it before, it's not valid. Ela afilu noda lo lifnei zerika meraseh. Even if he knew he was tameh beforehand, it's still meraseh. The reason is because it was an unknown source of impurity, and therefore that has a special dispensation. Even if you found out about it, you can still go ahead after that and do the korban. All right, we're going to end with a full quotation of the Baraita. We quoted just bits and pieces of it before, but here's the whole thing in context. Gufa hamoseh met mushkav l'rochbo shel derech litrumat tameh lenazir v'oseh pesach tahor. One finds a corpse on the along the width of the road. Regarding Tirum, for the laws of Tirumah, he's tamid, but for the laws of Nazir and Pesach, it's tahor, right, with special dispensation. That's only true if there's no other way to get around. The body was across the whole way. But if it was only partially, only blocking part of the way or under part of the way, and it could be that you went past that road and went on the other side. And so in that case, even for Tirumah, we can assume that you passed by not on top of the corpse and you'd be okay. In general, when you have a doubt about Tumah and Tahara in a public area, we are lenient and we assume it's okay. And furthermore, when does this stringency apply? That's only if the body was whole. But if it was in pieces, then you can assume that he stepped between them. Shema ben aperakim abad. But if it was all in the grave, then even if the body is in pieces or bones, nevertheless, the grave holds them together, and so the grave makes them all as one. Furthermore, when are we stringent regarding the teruma guy? When he's walking by foot. But if he's holding a load or going on an animal, tamid, because the load is big and the animal's big, and there would be an ohel over the tumah. If someone's walking, it could be that he stepped over it and he was not big enough, wide enough to be an ohel, so he could have gone over it and be tahor. But if you're carrying a load or with an animal, then it's impossible that you will not touch it or make an ohel. All this is only talking about this dispensation where it would be tahor if for nazir and Pesach. That's only talking about if it was unknown, a source of impurity. But if it was known, even if you didn't know it, but other people knew about it, then you'd be tameh. And what is the definition of that? I like this Baraita. Each clause continually redefines and specifies the one before. Only if no one in the whole world knew about it. But if one person knew about it, then it's not tumat hatom either. How do you find out? You have to take a census of everybody in the world. No, you can tell based on the circumstances, right? As follows: if he was hidden underneath hay, dirt, pebbles, then you can assume that this just fell on him and nobody put him there. Nobody knew the body was there. So that's called tumat tehom. However, if it's another place where people do go from time to time, and probably would have found him, if he's in water, in the dark, in clefts of a rock, even though it's not a main thoroughfare, but people do go from time to time, then you have to assume that someone did know about him. And finally, and the whole law of tumat tehom only applies to a body, to a corpse that we did not know that was there. It does not apply to other types of tumah like sheretz and zav. And so actually, this is the source that we began with the entire daf, and so we begin and end with the same source. Baruch Adonai Olam, Amen ve'amen.